Welcome back to Making It Awkward. I'm your host, Jessica Wilson. Today, I bring you my conversation with Dr. Deb Burgard. She's been suggested as a guest for a while, but I finally had a specific reason to bring her on. You've been mentioned as a guest multiple times, eating disorder field, health at every size. And I'm like, no, let's talk about being bullies. Yeah. So thank you for that. Yeah.
The joy and the heartbreak.
I asked Deb for an interview about how she and I have dared to say things out loud rather than keep them in the group chat, and how fragile people tend to respond to us. She and I discussed a keynote presentation I gave at an eating disorder conference in the Pacific Northwest recently. I hadn't known Deb was a member of that organization until this recording. A bit of background. During that part of the keynote presentation, I spoke to the state of the eating disorder field and how its organizations coalesced around a statement condemning Oprah for not discussing eating disorders in her recent televised special about Ozempic, but cannot speak to starvation outside their own patient population, nor go beyond striving for representation in its DEI attempts. To illustrate this, I showed the Oprah statement, and then I showed a video from Katie Couric's YouTube channel. It was about Equip, a telehealth eating disorder treatment organization. The video features two white parents and one black daughter of unknown age, who seem to be youngish, maybe a teen. The three are sitting on a couch in their home, dad, mom, and daughter in a row. The daughter appears folded in on herself, arms across her body. The video begins with Couric asking the parents when they started noticing changes in their daughter, and mom starts by saying, quote, "We were living in Africa and the food is obviously much different over there," end quote, as the video cuts to a photo of the three of them and other unnamed people wearing African print clothing, and mom wearing what seems to be a traditional African head wrap, which is where I first needed to pause the video during my initial watch. Mom then says they noticed their daughter was cutting out sugar and carbohydrates while they were there, which continued when they returned to the US. Mom goes on to talk while we see shots of the daughter silent with her arms wrapped around her. The daughter is then invited to talk about her own experience, which includes her wanting to get better because she was hurting other people by having an eating disorder. The video goes on as it talks about the treatments that Equip uses. Mom says they were in a unique position because she didn't come to us until she was 5 years old through the foster care system in California, and that they were going to fight for her, and that in order to fight for her, we needed to keep her close. Mom talked about the whole family chipping in to help the daughter recover. In this segment, there was an off-reference extended shot of the daughter cutting a baguette and laughing joyously. It very much resembled the iconic images of women eating salad alone. Couric asks when the parents started to see positive changes, and one of my favorite lines is when mom says of the daughter that, quote, "everything wasn't black or white to her," end quote. I paused and rewound it because, wow. Mom then gets tearful as she describes eating disorders as an ugly disease and how, quote, "it takes so much, but you have to keep fighting in order to get your child back. And also, it was always us against the eating disorder." Mom talks even more, and then it ends with the Equip logo. Dad, I think, had one sentence in the entire thing. At the keynote, after I showed the video, I invited a discussion, and folks had great things to say. The ad is very reflective of how the eating disorder field declares it's making progress. The ad features a black girl, only in the context of having been rescued by white people, and includes a sprinkling of cultural appropriation. When I mentioned that this video looks like a primetime interview and not the ad that it is, some people just hadn't noticed that. Viewers also didn't know that Equip, as of February 2022, had raised $58 million in a second round of investment that included backing from Katie Couric Media. Either way, I thought the talk went well, but all was not well. 2 days later, the representatives from treatment centers opened their inbox to find an email apology with the language of, quote, "we also wanted to acknowledge the difficult and unfortunate interaction that transpired at the conclusion of our conference yesterday. And also, quote, such an incident should never have occurred under our oversight. And for that, we extend our sincerest apologies," end quote. The email also said that, quote, "while much of the day was executed flawlessly, the final moments unfortunately veered off course. It was never our intention to provide a platform for what likely felt like an attack. Yet, regrettably, the closing minutes of the conference may have conveyed otherwise, end quote. They also announced immediate policy changes, which included requiring speakers to submit their presentations in advance of the conference, which will enable them to review the content to, quote, ensure alignment with the provided title and objectives during the negotiation phase. In other words, making sure that the speaker's talk will align with the values of the organization and ensure the comfort of the sponsors rather than speaking, say, an uncomfortable truth. And second, they will embed in their speaker contracts a stipulation prohibiting the inclusion of any business logos or marketing materials in their speeches that are not their own or directly affiliated. They also said any case studies or educational content featuring external companies will be presented anonymously. All right, y'all, I spoke to the Equip representative as the day was getting started. She and I had spoken in the past about shared clients. She had not seen the ad, but told me that Equip is great and really open to making changes when they get feedback, so whatever I had to say would be fine. I was surprised she hadn't seen the ad since I'd heard from multiple Black women who work for Equip and who had expressed direct concern about the ad. But whatever. All things seemed good to go. Deb and I discussed this keynote and ad today. And separately, all of you who've been listening for the last couple months have been witness to another example of a time my work inspired change in someone who pretended to be interested in doing the work to better themselves, but turns out had no intentions to do so. After my episode with Dr. Asher Laramie, he took issue with me calling him white, then offered me his DNA results to prove he has Asian ancestry, and to him, that meant he was Asian and not white. I had some questions, and I posed them to social media with context.
So it was weird.
White privilege is something I've always had.
For Asher to come on the show, talk all about his whiteness.
Again, that's a whiteness thing, right? And the defensiveness, as you say, it's a white privilege problem.
Only to turn around, say he wasn't white, and then offer his DNA results to prove it. It took me a sec to realize it was giving race science. Race science is a pseudoscience. It's not real. Something trying to prove that race is biological when in fact it's not. Our DNA and our ancestry does not dictate race. The idea that race is biological was made up to justify the hierarchical rankings of people in a white supremacist society. If race was biological, it was science. We could say that people of color have additional characteristics associated with those genes, like lower intelligence, fewer skills, and more prone to criminality if they were folks of color, which was done in the 18 and 1900s. One outcome of all of this was the forced sterilization of many people of color, including Fannie Lou Hamer. Laws allowing forced sterilization were passed up until 1937. Most states have not repealed these laws. So in the 2024 of things, people are able to 23andMe themselves. At the same time, we see a bunch of populism and xenophobia around the world. So where do you see race biology sneaking into conversations?
After all this, I saw that he removed me as a follower on his Instagram account, which, fine. Then, just before recording this, I checked back and found that he had disabled his former Instagram handle and started another one. And I also saw that he'd blocked me. Therefore, any former critique or any concerns of him that had been tagged at a different handle, he could no longer be traced to. I also learned that he'd blocked Dr. Whitney Trotter and likely other people who make his sphincter tight. Oddly enough, Deb mentions race science in this episode, so this was a good primer. I met Deb at the 2012 Renfrew Eating Disorder Conference. She was keynoting the first day, and I was mind blown. She talked about health at every size and weight stigma, and how the eating disorder community refuses to acknowledge its anti-fatness. It was amazing, and I was an instant fan. In the next few years, I joined Health at Every Size think tank meetings and helped rewrite the Health at Every Size principles in 2014. I crashed an invite-only Health at Every Size fancy dinner to just listen, and ended up sharing why intuitive eating doesn't work for me or some of my clients, while at a table that included at least one of the authors of the book. My memory is fuzzy if it was one or both, but I do remember the look on everyone's face when I said it. But in late 2016, after multiple conferences and having this same conversation about health at every size and eating disorder fields not moving beyond second wave feminism, and then also the 2016 election, I needed a break. I unsubscribed from all the listservs, stopped speaking into a void, and decided to put my head down and focus on my new position at UC Davis. It wasn't until 2019 when a friend invited me to co-present at a workshop at the 2019 Run Through Conference, the irony, that I got back in and saw what had changed and what hadn't. I had missed the rise to influence of the thin women proclaiming themselves to be anti-diet and liberatory. At that point, I reached out to Deb to ask her what the fuck was happening, and she and I have stayed in touch since then. Today's episode has a lovely addition for listeners. About 3/4 of the way through, you'll hear my and Deb's delight as Dr. Whitney Trotter joins the call. She asks Deb a consult question, and if listeners don't know why Deb is famous in the eating disorder and health at every size communities, you will be able to listen and learn. Deb gives a masterclass in how to disagree. She also talks about the fundamental attribution error and applies the Heisenberg principle to eating disorder diagnoses in this episode. And with that, I'm excited to introduce Dr. Deb Burgard. Deb is a psychologist and activist and one of the co-founders of the Health at Every Size approach from the 1980s, as well as the creator of the bodypositive.com website from the 1990s. As you know, she and I met in 2012, and she says that we've been on this adventure ever since. Dr. Deb Burgard, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It's wonderful to be here.
Deb, you were on my mind at the beginning of this month. I was asked to keynote an eating disorder conference in the Pacific Northwest. It was 3 presentations. The first presentation was all about how eating disorder treatment is carceral. The hour-plus presentation was all about how eating disorder treatment centers are prisons, which was fine. The 8 or so treatment centers who had sponsored the conference were in the room. So we're hearing all of this too. And I did my presentation, which included the Equip ad. I thought the conversation went really well. Apparently it did not. So after I showed this ad, while it's going, I'm looking out to people in the audience who are watching it. And then I ask people what they think afterwards. They talk about how, like, the stereotype of the, transracial adoption, how the body language of the we'll say young woman or girl, I'm not sure, in the video, how the white parents did all the talking, and just the things that anyone would pick up, how it was not clear that it was an ad, right? Like, speaking of, who's disclosing ads and not, it looked like a Katie Couric news story.
Yes, it did.
And
apparently, isn't her foundation sponsoring Equip or something like that? There's some sort of financial relationship there. Yeah.
The end of the ad is the Equip logo. And at that point, to me, it is clear that it's an ad, but it was not beforehand. In this presentation, somebody said, again, like, until I saw the end, I didn't know it was an ad. And I left that view on the screen while we had the conversation, because part of the conversation was about, that a little bit of deception. Okay. I thought it was a good conversation. I thought the keynote went well. And on Monday, a letter from the board that invited me went out to all of the treatment centers apologizing for perhaps making them feel attacked in the last few minutes of the conference. I am surprised, not surprised by this information. I am surprised that a 1 hour plus conversation about these treatment centers being prison did not raise red flags enough for people. Yeah. But that presentation was given by a beige person. It was not given by a Black woman.
Exactly. Also, they seemed in what I saw of the reaction later, because I'm a member of that organization. So I got some, oh my God, you may be hearing about blah, 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 blah. Oh my God, oh my God.
Tell me more, Dad, please.
Yeah, no, they basically sent out this, we care about everybody's opinion. Tell us your opinions. I think they were incredibly focused on people feeling shamed because the identification of a particular program is kind of where I feel like I see the reaction in general, but I also see the reaction when people are specifically held accountable.
Yeah.
And then the other people who kind of consider that person part of the us rather than the them, right? The us, they mobilize to kind of get really protective of that person or that entity. And then the people who are trying to say, this is something that's a problem, can you be accountable, become the problem. And then it may be that we're already the problem in there. We're already othered in some kind of way, which I think is true.
And I will say, I didn't show that ad to be like to hold somebody accountable. It was just like, look at this weird thing that happened. Like, I don't care.
It's off of YouTube.
Yeah, it was off of you. I didn't go to your website and take it. It was like, let's talk about this like specific example. So people were saying that the carcerality thing was all about, stuff generally. And then Jessica makes specific. And we can't do that anymore.
What's interesting when you're talking is that you're watching everybody. And there's people who are like,
yeah.
And they're totally with you.
Yeah. Totally
with you. So I will tell you, the first time I experienced this was when I was teaching my dance classes in 1983. And so they wanted us to come on one of the morning shows that had a couple of hosts,
Oh, yeah.
like into the studio. And so we're like fat women in our leotards and our leg warmers because it's 1983 and I had choreographed this whole thing to DeBarge, like you wear it well, and we were like doing the whole thing in the studio. Audience is there on the bleachers kind of in the studio, and the two hosts are sitting smack in the middle of the bleachers, and half of the people who are watching are just enchanted. They are like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing. And so one of the co-hosts is clapping and she's just like totally getting into the music and everything. The other half of the studio audience, including the other half of the team, the co-hosts, looks like somebody just gave them lemons, and is just like horrified, offended, just kind of like, what the fuck do you think you're doing? Like, how dare you make me watch your body? Kind of like really. And, by then I'm starting to sort of get my feet under me about what this whole kind of thing is. Like, I have a theory.
Okay.
And I remember my emotional reaction was kind of, I love it that there's people who get this. I know that there are people who don't get this. And I felt kind of like the people who don't get this, I feel bad for them.
Right.
It was just kind of all that ranking shit, that is kind of at the base of all this stuff, and they're invested in it. Right. And so when you come along and say, nope, even if it's in the context of joy and liberation, you're going to get some of that stuff. And of course, treating eating disorders, this is what I'm doing in another way and trying to help divest,
Yeah.
And it's a through line in the way I do therapy that I had this weird experience going to conferences where I would think everybody's doing this, because this is the problem. This is the problem we're trying to fix.
Yeah. Right.
And then I would talk about what I do, and there would be this like, I've never heard this before. I've never thought about this before. And it was just, so you just kind of think, okay, I guess I need to keep talking about this, or I need to keep doing this, or this seems to be helping people. And of course, when you and I meet, in 2012, those many decades later,
Mm-hmm.
you just opened up another really deep chapter for me of being able to understand where it hadn't gone where it needed to go yet. You know, like my own understanding of this. I was so used to being the radical person in the room, you know, that it was like so helpful to have that critique and have that deepening and consciousness of kind of everybody else. That, I mean, I'd sort of gone, let's expand this group of people, but I hadn't done the whole expansion in my mind or in my practice, or, you know, and I think it's just been incredibly important to me. And of course, there's all these experiences that you and I have had of being in those rooms together. So when this happened to you, I think I said something to you like, oh gosh, here comes the sphinctered up. Kind of.
You said that should be the title.
Yeah, they're gonna, when they see us coming, they sphincter up. You know, just kind of that whole thing that I saw on the faces of those people in the studio audience. You know, it was just, yeah. And this is something that basically happened to me eventually.
Yeah.
Within the Academy for Eating Disorders, which is this large organization, global organization for people who treat eating disorders. And like, it started off, you had to have a sponsor.
Oh, to get in?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
My sponsor was Susan Woolley, who I feel so much affection for, because Susan was one of the only fat people in that room. Oh. And she was also one of the only people who would go to conferences to talk about eating disorders, and the psychoanalytic framework was so much the, you know, main thing that everybody was working with, that when she would try to think about how to communicate what she was doing in therapy, she felt like she would be censured if she did, because she hugged her patients sometimes.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that's where we start, right? Like in this organization in particular, right? And the very academic, very white, very masculine, you know, it's like very men. Very few, the women, the RDs are persona non grata. The RDs are, we don't really need these people.
Nope.
The people who have lived experience of eating disorders cannot come out about that. You know, it was hard to be in those rooms. And when Ellen Schimann came along and said, I want to start a health at every size special interest group, and that was like 2001 or something, 2002. And I'm like, oh, I know. We have to, you know, like, I don't really like this place.
I don't want to talk to these people any more than I have to.
Oh, really? And she's like, come on. We need to do, like, she's just, you know, she deserves the credit for that. I kind of reluctantly got dragged along, but I'm really glad that we started it, because it started a conversation that needed to happen. And it was the, you know, at one point the biggest of the special interest groups, and they kept doing stuff that's so typical of what they do, which is like, you know, they set up rules to undermine continuity of the special interest groups, or to make it harder to do these things, or to make sure, you know, it's just a way that they'll figure out a way, you know, because they have those rule-based things.
We are often troublemakers and those who inspire sphincter clenching. I remember in 2016, you and I attended a conference in San Francisco. And to set it up quickly, there was this lovely presentation by Erica Hines and Desiree Adaway, who were talking about multiple things, but also how there's no color blindness and all of the reasons that that is true. The first, like, clinical couple to come up on stage, there was two of them. Pale woman. Okay. The white woman came up and was like, that was the most helpful and important presentation that I've been to. I loved it. And I just want everyone to know that I myself am colorblind. And there's this like stillness in the room. And like, I think if it had ended there, perhaps that would have been fine. But then we learned all about how her husband is a person of color. She gave specifics, but we won't.
Oh, gosh, I forgot about this part.
Oh, yeah, I remember. And her children are, mixed race. And like at that point, I was like, oh, no. You cannot claim your, biracial children and your spouse as both like evidence of your colorblindness. And also, did you listen to what they were saying? And people were looking around. People are looking at me. We're in the back.
We were in the back, and Lisa was there with us too.
Yeah, and Kara was there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we are like writing notes because this is going on long enough that we are writing notes about it in the back, like passing notes between people. She's talking long enough for us to be writing, like, should we say something? Would you, like, Kara's like, do I get up and say something? Do I interrupt something? Why isn't my coworker up there, like, interrupting this monologue to just note that this is happening, that this is a dynamic? She's a therapist. Somebody should say something. And that didn't happen. So
until you.
It's like, can you just press pause on this and just say what the people are thinking and wondering about? Because what this did has just undone that entire keynote.
Yeah.
Because then the white person in the eating disorder field comes in and says that doesn't exist. And yeah.
It was such an education. So when you said that, you were like, I'm looking at you, you're looking at me, you're saying, nah. Mm-mm. And I ended up just saying out loud, nope, from the back of the room. Nope, we're not going to do this.
Mm-mm.
Okay, so now we are in the Twilight Zone, right? Like, so.
From the back of a large room, there are multiple people. So Lisa was there with you, Kara was standing with you, and it was just like, we are pausing.
Yeah.
This, especially because the organization had said, we're so dedicated to social justice.
Yeah.
This year. And I'm like, this is what it looks like if you're really about social justice, is not letting this go on.
Mm-hmm. And there was, so anyway, there was a conversation that ensues, but from the podium, where, to her credit, she was like, I'll talk to you about this. Tell me more. Teach me, kind of thing, which is a little bit like, okay, now I'm standing there in the back of the room, like, which part of this? How do I say it? What do I do? Like, you just kind of like,
this is a large room. This is
this is the ballroom, Yes. So, but tried my best to kind of make it plain how disrespectful this was and how ignoring the effects of other people who have these experiences, is just kind of, anyway, it was a brouhaha. And it was disruptive, and there were big reactions. And I just remember I talked to the person later. I just checked in with her to kind of say, do you need to talk? Do you need to process this with me? Because I did this thing. And she was very like, nope. But since then, I've actually seen her do some positive things. So that's kind of a nice kind of sequence of things eventually. And that's great. But the thing that was the most important thing to me is that I was walking out of that room and I was walking back to go to the next thing or something. And there had been a room set aside as a hospitality room for the BIPOC attendees. And I just heard hilarity. The door was closed, but it was like everybody was just in stitches. And I was like, oh my God, oh my God. This is such a good sign. Like, this is it, this is like all the white people going, why don't we have the black people at the table, and then let's bring a few black people to the table. And then everybody's harmed by this, and there's like nothing. And then everybody just is like, well, I don't know what to do. And, like that was something that was an innovation that No Lose had done. And so when that conference was getting planned, I was passing this through and kind of going, this is a thing, like this could be a thing.
Hospitality, the decompress room.
Yeah, like people need to get away from us, and they need to kind of be together and kind of say, I'm not crazy about this, right? Like this is really happening. Like people need that room. Anyway, it was wild.
It's so fun. I still remember, yes, the folks that I met in person there too, because we were just like, where are we that this speaker was allowed to say that or felt fine saying that? And the person introducing them said nothing. Like, why did it take somebody from the back of the room to stop the show?
I mean, there couldn't be a more blatant demonstration of how there are norms that prevent people from being okay. There are norms. And, you know, we can see it because when you say this is not a thing to do, you're changing a norm. You know, you're trying to change a norm. You're trying to say, in this kind of organization, we are going to do some of these things sometimes. Be aware. You know, we are going to do it for ourselves. We're going to do it for each other. We're going to make this a really important part of what we do. We are going to listen to people about what their experiences are. And if you thought you were doing everything fine and it's not a big deal and what's all this social justice stuff, it is.
Yeah.
Right? How big of a deal? Somebody fainted in the hallway, you know, because it was such a big deal. I mean, like it's so like,
oh, and then you were the bully, right?
Well, let's go back to that audience. The people in the AED call me a divisive figure.
Okay.
Because there's people who are fans of this and there are people who are absolutely not. And, you know, when I think about when things were happening where Health at Every Size was getting critiqued, there were friends of mine who were like, aren't you feeling defensive about this? You know? And I just thought, I'm learning from people. This is the most exciting thing in my life that happens sometimes, is that I don't get it right. And now I'm going to learn more. And now I'm going to deepen these things more. And it's not even mine. It's not mine.
Right?
It's not anybody's. It's like, you're just fucking doing the work. It's not a brand. I used to, you know, somebody called me an influencer at one point. And I was like,
yeah.
No. No.
Oh.
I mean, it's just kind of like, I feel like it's so much more organic to me. Like, it's just kind of, we're all doing this thing. We're all trying to fucking heal. That's what we're doing to me. We all inherit everything that's happened. And everything that goes on is understandable if you knew what got done and what didn't get done coming to this point. It's all understandable. And so here we are. Now we're the people on the planet. Now we have a chance to repair, connect, you know, do something good, create together. And so let's do it, you know? And I see that in my therapy work with people so much. We were here talking so much more these days about people's parents and their grandparents and their great grandparents and sort of what was going on in their extended families and, you know, kind of how things make sense.
Yeah, how things make sense.
It's a very different model from what I got trained in, which was very medical, very individualistic. You know, I was teasing you about, we should talk about the fundamental attribution error concept, because it explains a lot. You know, it's like this idea that if you have a bunch of people who are watching somebody do something, if you ask the audience, why are they doing that? The audience will overwhelmingly talk about individual characteristics of that actor. They will say, because he's a neat person and it's important to him to have, you know, everything at right angles, or there's this or there's that. And if you ask the person in the middle of the person who's acting, why are you doing this? They will almost always talk about environmental reasons for doing it. And I think of it as it's kind of weirdly related to the Heisenberg principle of where you can't measure something without being a part of it, without changing it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like all of this research that we've been doing the categories for eating disorders, let's say.
Oh, okay.
Go right back to that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a bunch of guys standing around and kind of looking at this phenomenon, like, what's going on with these girls? And they're kind of like, yeah, like they're so thin. Mm-hmm. And then another person is like, yeah, and they're throwing up. Oh my gosh, and then another person is like, oh no, but they're really eating a ton of food, like, oh my God. And it's like all the reactions are become the characteristics of the diagnoses.
Yeah, right.
It becomes the way that people decide to carve up the descriptions.
Wow. People are just looking at shit and making it up.
Yes, they are. And they are not talking to the people who are acting in the middle of the room.
No. Oh.
Because the people in the middle of the room are not going to say, they're not going to carve it up the way this is carved up. They're not going to say it's different. It's a different phenomenological experience. The part of my eating disorder that is about restricting, or the part of my eating disorder that's about throwing up, or part of my eating disorder that's about binging, or everything else about my eating disorder, which is a billion things. They're going to talk about, I went to my doctor at 13 and they told me I was too fat. My coach told me I'm not going to be fast unless I lose weight. My mom took me to Weight Watchers. They're going to tell you about the experience of, I had a friend who was fat and I never want to be treated the way they were. They're going to talk about social safety.
Survival.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So back to that 2016 conference.
Yes.
There was we'll call it a summit meeting of the people who were concerned. There was like attempts to censure Deb. My favorite part of this entire thing, it was this whole like, how do we support Deb?
It was an AED thing. Because one of my friends who was in the leadership at the time was getting texts from the executive director, and she was showing me the texts. This was like, you were saying to me, to my left, and you were saying this, I need to have something to say here, right? And you were trying to, feel supported enough to say something. Mm-hmm. And I was listening to what you said. And meanwhile, this person across the table is shoving the phone over and looking, read this, because they're talking about, you have to soothe Deb. Can you please try to soothe Deb and, calm her down? Mm-hmm. Because this stuff is happening where she's at the mic and she's saying stuff to people, right? And so all that was happening in that moment. Mm-hmm. And it was sort of like, that was the most important thing about that you said, this doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
And then the next person started talking.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that was when I was like, can we just pause and take this in? This is a moment that we say we're interested in, This is incredibly important that somebody is able to be, tell us this. And then people started a little bit talking about their own feelings in that moment. It wasn't terribly helpful, I think, necessarily to you, but we did that.
It was something. So, because you have thrived all along, your head is doing a thing. Because to me, you have seemed strong, resilient, respected, I think is a lot of that for me. The people still love you. The people still want to hear from you. Yes, you're still a leader, even though there have been weirdo policies and guidelines written to silence you, which is something that happened, or at least what I feel was close to happening after the keynote conference. They put together like a loose, this is going to be our policy. We're not going to do X, Y, and Z thing anymore to make people comfortable. And it's like, which people are you talking about?
That's exactly right.
Right.
Show us all your slides. This is.
Yeah, right. So policy based on my ad showing. And yes, because you have been yourself, I was like, okay, I am able to be myself and I'm going to be okay. Going to be fine.
I think oh my gosh, that's amazing.
So thanks. Thought of you immediately.
Wow. That's really powerful. I just feel like I hope that the ways that you do that for me are clear to you. Because I just find the ways, I mean, I quote you all the time. There's a slide of you in that t-shirt. But I made it awkward. That is like a slide that I used in some of my keynotes because it was like, this person helps me see things, helps me tolerate this, helps me feel like I'm on to something here. Like, it's like, how do you withstand the half of the audience that is really trying to shut you down, right? How do you stand that? You have to be really letting yourself be buoyed and connected to the part of the people who are like right there with you and teaching you. Also, I think there's something about a queer experience that prepares us for this stuff. Like, I mean, there's like this early on experience of you could go the conventional way, you could go climb this ladder, you could strive to be in the rankings or not, like, because there's no kind of perfect solution to that, because you're either going to be going against yourself to sort of perform for the rankings, or you're going to be aligned with yourself. And there's going to be this kind of reaction to you sometimes. If you are monitoring the joy channel.
Wow.
Right. And I find that joy channel with you. And I find that joy channel with a part of the audience that's kind of like this thing.
Yeah. The people who are with you when you're talking. Yes.
They recognize, okay, we're doing something new here. We're departing from the norms.
Yeah.
And we're willing to get uncomfortable.
The ones who were thinking. I love the thinking faces. I tend to call on the thinking faces. I'm like, I'm going to give you a second, but I see something is working like really hard right there. And I would love to know what it is.
You see the gears.
Yeah. I see it in your face.
Yeah. And I quote you often in that thing that you said early on, which was like, well, but what is the problem we're trying to solve? Which is just such a fantastic question. And I think about that all the time. And, I just think there's something about how this came together. I remember the moments that we were talking and exchanging numbers at Renfrew,
Yeah, I remember sitting there and like waiting the crowd out to be the last person. I'm like, I don't want to be cut off by the person behind me. This keynote is over. There's this line of people waiting for you. And I'm like, I'm fine. I'm just going to sit down, wait it out.
And I was just so delighted to meet you. And I just had this feeling like I sometimes have in my life where, it's just this feeling of big promise. Like there's something important here. I don't know what it's going to be. I loved that, the things that you were telling me in that moment. And I could see it's a sea of white people and you're here, and it's like really hard to be here, I'm sure, Oh, God.
Hold on.
Hey!
Oh, no. Oh, my.
I was just telling Jessica, I think the work that you're doing is something that teaches me, and I just want to support you. I just want to lift it up.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Whitney, is there a question or a topic you want?
Yeah, make sure that we cover today.
Ooh, so many. Your hair looks amazing, by the way, Jess.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I did not know early onset precocious puberty that doctors can deny you based on race because they believe that young Black and Latina girls go through puberty earlier. I was thinking about this in like weight neutral aspects, but I think this gets missed in children who are like over the curve despite a family history, like body odor and genitalia hair. I was like, what
Oh, that's such a good
You know?
question. I don't know if I have any expertise to think about that. There are so many theories about what is causing that, and exposure to environmental sources of hormones is sort of one of those kind of ways of thinking about why that might be happening.
Yes.
It's just such a thorny issue. It's hard to kind of to say something simple about this, because there isn't something simple about it. Like that debate in medicine about using racialized categories for things.
Yes. Yes.
Is part of that race science bullshit.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And on the other hand, only looking at the experience of white children is obviously, extremely problematic, right? So this whole thing of like, do you have the data for everybody or not?
Yes.
Like we really need that data.
Yeah.
So to me, this goes back to vast areas of research practices that have to start over, because the people who have that machinery to work with are not the people who need to be asking the questions.
Yes. 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 Absolutely.
Right?
Because I'm like, if a kid was in a higher weight body, I guarantee the recommendation would have been to lose weight and then to come back, which would, and I think I really think they're going to start doing the weight loss medications for early onset puberty too. Like I'm like, this is coming down the pipeline. I can see that.
So one of the things about weight loss as a prescription for anything that you can always use with a physician, because this is where they just start talking out of their asses, is you can say, all right, so show me data that the kids who are in the situation who, reduce their weight, suppress their weight. I would say suppress their weight, because it's weight suppression. It's not somehow we're going towards a neutral place here. It's like, we're suppressing somebody's weight while they're growing, by the way.
While they're growing.
Let me show me the data that these kids that lost weight and then eventually regained it, and these kids who had this issue, who just kind of went on and didn't have that intervention, show me the better outcome for these kids here. And they won't have it because it's not there. Yeah. Because essentially the assumption here is that everybody should be thin, and the people who are thin are the ones who are doing everything right. And if you're fat, it's because you are failed thin person. We have to explain you. We have to explain what's going on. And you getting back to this same weight as somebody who's never been fat is going to solve everything. Yeah. Yeah. And there's no data for it, because when it's like a death spiral conversation, because I'll say that to surgeons. I'll say, show me the data where the fat people who were needing knee replacements lost weight, and these are the ones that didn't lose weight, and here are the outcomes later. Show me the data. And they'll say, I'll say, there isn't that data, right? And they say, no. And I said, why do you think that is? Yep. And they say, because people don't stay weight suppressed, or they say they don't keep their weight off, right? And I say, so let's think about the actual intervention that you're proposing, which is weight cycling. And let's look at those outcomes. That's a logic argument. It's not like you can get them to do the right thing with it. Yeah. But I feel really gleeful in those moments, because it's kind of like, you are going to have to do your fucking homework with me. Exactly. Exactly. Yes. And you didn't get trained with this, and they admit it when you ask them. Yeah. That's so true. I could talk to y'all for hours. Yay. Let's do it sometime. Yes. Wonderful. So. Thank you.
Love you.
Love you.
I'm so glad that happened. That was great.
Me too.
Your part about show me the data is so iconically Deb. If you want to know what Deb is famous for, Whitney asked a consultation. Whitney asked a consultation question, and this is going to be the answer if you've never heard Deb before.
Right, for better or for worse. Yeah.
No, I mean,
it's effective sometimes and not others. So it is something that is important to me that I keep coming back to.
Yeah, I think it inspires, people's critical thinking,
Mhm.
which is great. Who knew? 12 years later. Oh,
Much affection.
I mean, I like that I finally came up with a very specific reason to have you on. You've been mentioned as a guest multiple times, eating disorder field, health at every size. And I'm like, no, let's talk about being bullies. Yeah. So thank you for that. Yeah.
The joy and the heartbreak.
The people we meet by being bullies are the people we want to meet.
Yeah. They don't like us anyway, the people who don't like us. I don't know. I feel like that's an early lesson that's really important too.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I came out to my mom, she said a lot of things. This was like in 87, I guess. I was a late bloomer in that respect. And she was like a little confused, and she was worried about me because of AIDS, which is not what she should have been worried about. And she was worried about people not liking me or, just rejecting me. And I said to her, Mom, I really don't think there's like a lot more people who are jazzed that I'm a feminist who are going to be upset that I'm a lesbian.
Mm.
I think the people who are already not fans are still going to be not fans.
Yeah.
And so they've been there all along.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not fans of them either in a lot of ways. So, I mean, I could be if we had some good conversations, and, I'm always open to that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
again.
you.
I
Thank you so much.
Thanks again to Deb for coming on the show. As you can tell, she and I are not invested in maintaining norms in the eating disorder field and haven't been afraid to try and make change. We've also inspired policy changes by organizations to preserve the comfort of the people upholding the status quo. Eating disorder organizations see their supposed values crumble when faced with the literal tears of members of the establishment. The same organizations and people telling us they are invested in growth, change, and being curious stumble when someone speaks a truth that may disrupt their bottom line. And still, some people question why the eating disorder field stays stuck. Hopefully, today, that has become more clear. And for those of you out there who are protected by the eating disorder establishment, I ask you what you are doing to dismantle that status quo. What are you doing that goes beyond your one-on-one work? What are you doing so that those who are most marginalized in this field, especially those more marginalized than Deb and I, are not the ones constantly putting ourselves out there to be shat upon for saying aloud what's already been in the group chat? If the audiences of the conferences you go to look like the one I spoke to, an ocean of white and beige faces with a dot of melanin here and there, I'm sure you're not doing enough. And I ask you what you're doing to sit with discomfort. If you truly feel like this field needs to change, I ask you to make it awkward. This has been Making It Awkward. I'm your host, Jessica Wilson. You can support this show by rating, reviewing, and sharing it with a friend. You can also become a sustaining Patreon member of the show, which will support the editing and mixing of our very own Jen Jacobs. You'll also get access to bonus content and extra dad content. This is a production of The Body Politic, is supported by Patreon members like you and the legacy of Sacramento Health Board Services.